In our second full episode of The Encrypted Economy, we spoke with David Harris, co-founder of Manetu, a consumer-friendly platform for streamlining enterprise privacy management and compliance. David walked us through how he became interested in privacy after a long career running companies in the financial services space. We spoke about the ethics of data privacy and the trade-offs that can occur with rapid adoption of emerging technologies, before turning to how transparency and control are becoming the central tenets of individual privacy rights and an emerging area of law. We also covered how innovation is going to be shaping our digital identities going forward. It was a great early episode to have on our show, and a theme we will continue to explore as part of the encrypted economy. I hope you'll enjoy it. Welcome to The Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, and security relating to digital assets and data. I'm Eric Hess, your host and founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I am super excited to have the co-founder David Harris of Manetu with The Encrypted Economy today. Dave and I go way back. We'll leave out the details of how far back. But Dave's been at a number of great companies. Before he was at Manetu, he was with the London Stock Exchange Group. And I remember talking to David a couple of years ago when he was there, and he said he was working on some pretty cutting edge stuff with regards to distributed ledger technology. So hopefully he'll be able to reveal some of that with us without getting sued for non-disclosure infringement.
I promise that I never breach agreements.
Before that, he was CEO of the National Stock Exchange and the Chicago Board of Options Exchange Equities. And before that, he was at the American Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, the NASD. So he's had a storied career on the financial services side, and now he's taken it to the more cutting edge technology. So I'm really excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, I love being here, Eric. Thank you. You're right. We do go way back. So far back that I don't even get nervous. I forget that we're actually doing a podcast.
That's right.
I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's my second episode. I got to learn to loosen it up a little bit. I got to find my swim lane on this.
Well, I will tell you that you do not make your guests nervous.
Awesome. Right? That's good. Of course, I know you forever, so you shouldn't be nervous.
Good then to start with me. That is good to start with me. And plus the other magic of editing, just in case.
There you go. So Manetu, not too long ago, I found it out, I think through LinkedIn that you're on Manetu. I'm like, called you up, David, what's Manetu? And you told me it was really exciting stuff. I've been following the company, and it looks like you guys are making some really great progress, and you got some really cool technology. You want to tell us a little bit about it, and also just tell us like how you stumbled upon it, maybe even starting with the London Stock Exchange Group, what you were doing there with distributed ledger technology, because it sounds like that sort of gave you a swim lane in to Manetu, at least got you thinking in terms of that kind of technology.
Yeah, no, it did. So what's interesting for us, and for me in particular, is that when I left capital markets, I really was getting into kind of the ideas of blockchain and how blockchain could enable new business models. And as you can imagine in financial services, right, where you have so many regulatorily required intermediaries, right, that the SEC or whoever stuck an intermediary in place to fulfill a function or a regulatory, requirement, right? So you have this entire infrastructure, right, that is in some ways artificial, right? Because you and I can exchange an asset just between ourselves, right? I could have a physical certificate and I can endorse the back of it and I can negotiate it, hand it to you, and you own it now, right? And because of the way the world evolved, we had a lot of intermediaries that got put in the middle to stop bad behavior, right? So when you start thinking about blockchain, you realize that some of the bad behavior that the regulators were worried about, the operational challenges that exist in our, existing financial services world, could be reduced or eliminated with a blockchain, right? So I lost my mind over that concept. Like I literally, for 3 years, like was just like up to my eyeballs and trying to say, okay, how do you introduce this enabling technology, right? Because to me, it's not so much what blockchain is, it's what blockchain allows you to do, right? And the use cases. And in fairness to me, many, or just in bluntness, I spent a lot of time explaining to people why blockchain was not a good technology for what they wanted to do with it, right? Because blockchain, really is very powerful, but in a lot of ways, the market participants in financial services kind of like the way the world works, right? And so, yes, everybody wants to disintermediate, everybody wants to innovate, right? But then, you get to the business guys, and the business guys are like, well, what do you mean, right? You're going to be able to do that directly, right? That's not how the business works, right? So I kind of kept my eyes out for opportunities where you could take these emerging technologies that I was getting exposed to at LSEG and figure out how to use them to solve real problems. And my partner and co-founder Moise Kohari, who I worked with at LSEG and went on to State Street, left me behind. And when I was left behind,
Does that
I
hurt?
it did hurt. No, actually, it did hurt, right? Because truthfully, I loved working at LSEC. Like, I really did. Like, for me, they're a global organization. They're fundamentally critical to the EU. Their business model is expanding to all sorts of different spaces. So, for me, with a mild case of, and better, that mild doesn't belong in the sentence, a mild case of ADD, LSEG was beautiful, right? So I was actually glad. I miss Moyes and the team, but I was glad to stay at LSEC, right? And one of the things I inherited when Moyes left was big data, right? And so we were becoming more and more cognizant of it as an organization about the vast amounts of data we had. And some of the data, like most companies, very siloed, right? So to try to break down those silos and really leverage your data sets. And as you know, I'm a lawyer and I'm from the financial services and the regulatory background. It started to occur to me that a lot of the data that we collect without the people who provide it to us actually even being aware of the data we collect, right? A lot of our efforts that we were making around moving to machine learning algorithms, right, are really, if you scratch beyond, efficiency plays, right? Right now, I have 400 people scouring filings of publicly traded companies when I could use natural language processing algorithms to, at the very least, take a first cut, right, and really kind of carve through. So I'm starting to think to myself about the ethics of data, right? And vendors always invite you on panels to make you feel good. And so I started to get invited to panels, and I started to ask people, right, in a kind of a collaborative way, is anyone really thinking about the ethics of data? And one panel that I was on was with a woman from MIT who ran their machine learning, big data practice at MIT. And she said, look, for the first time next semester, this was like 3 years ago, that MIT was going to have an ethics course on data, right? So we were way ahead of ourselves, as we always get, right? Into this is what technology lets us do. This is great. But no one took a step back and said, ethically, what are our obligations here? Right? What should we do?
Is it really even truly ethics or just assumptions that have been driven by the way that data has grown up in the enterprise environment? Nobody questions when Google basically is able to build an avatar of who you are when you're giving it away for free and you're getting a search engine in return. Is it a combination of ethics and the way that the business has absorbed this kind of data?
Well, I kind of think you'll appreciate this as a regulatory guy too, right? We see the same patterns in regulation, right? That something new comes along, some early adopters demonstrate how valuable it can be, then a whole bunch of people jump on the bandwagon. And as people jump on the bandwagon, risks get created that we really didn't think about when we first started, right? I mean, like the securities laws are the same way. Like They're only 100 years old, but we take for granted the fact that when a company files something, right, it's true. But that wasn't always the case, right? Like until there was so much fraud and bad behavior occurring in the early, 20th century and before the SEC, right? Fraud was fraud, right? But there was nobody kind of saying you shouldn't do that, right? So regulators came along and created rules, and the rules set the rails for behavior. I kind of feel like this is kind of the same general thing, right? That the internet, whether or not you and I grew up. I mean, I remember the days of the manual typewriter, right? So the internet is new, and we didn't really appreciate, I don't think, as regulators, kind of the trade-offs that people would have when, yes, this is super convenient. I love searching the internet, or I love getting directions of going from A to B. But I never really thought about, and I don't think anyone really thought about what you're giving up in exchange for that. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? I'm just saying that there's a quid pro quo there. So you take a step back and you say, okay, we're seeing a proliferation of global data privacy laws, right? And to me, that's like the early reaction of regulators to behaviors that they're now perceiving as bad, or the public is now perceiving as bad. And the data privacy laws are trying to set some just basic rules around what we do every day by participating in the world that we live in, right? So it is not ethics, right? But kind of to the credit of a lot of people, right? If you really research the subject, you'll find that there are people from the very beginning of the internet who were literally concerned about privacy, right? To their great credit. So the thoughts that are now percolating in the world about, oh my God, somebody's creating a profile of me, or I am willy-nilly allowing my watch, right, and all these apps to collect data on me, and that data is for sale, and that data can be purchased by somebody who's putting it all back together again. And by the way, figuring out what my familial relationships are, who are also out there doing what they're doing, right? And it may be that these companies have a better profile of my health than what I have of my health,
Yeah.
right? And so they know more about me than I know about me. You don't think of that when you first start in the space.
Right. And it's kind of funny because, like, as a lawyer negotiating for clients for market data providers, I often throw in a clause that the vendor can use our data in the aggregate, but only in the aggregate in an anonymized fashion. And that's literally put in every agreement that I negotiate where there's a vendor that can potentially take the data and isolate it and potentially trade against it, right? And that's really done because we've all learned about companies that had taken the data. We hear a lot of stories, and there's been a lot of enforcement actions brought against the companies that basically mine the data and trade ahead of it. So the fintech vendors certainly wouldn't necessarily be immune, or certainly not immune from packaging the data. So we put that in our agreements. But to your point, even it's an agreement, it's an obligation, contractual. But how do you surveil it? How do you ensure that they're actually not doing it, irrespective of whether they're trading it? They could be pulling together data sets and selling it to trading entities that could trade against the data, and that might be completely legal, but violating the contract, or if there's not that kind of provision, still permitted. So we have it even at the trading level. A lot of firms don't really pay that close attention to the data that they're giving away to their third-party vendors. So it's still very much an enterprise level issue as well as a personal issue.
Yeah, no, it really is. And on the trading side, right, it's interesting because you pointed out I've been so many places for so long, right? But I remember in the late 1990s, I was at the NASD before it became FINRA, and I was, lucky enough to be able to participate in all of their board meetings. And at the beginning of every board meeting, one of the board members would essentially read a prepared statement, no matter what the issue was. And his position was that the data that's collected by the exchanges for the quotes in the national market system, the revenues associated that belong to the investor. because it was the investor who created the quote, that created the value, that the exchanges were aggregating and selling to everyone because they needed to have it.
That's
Right?
heresy today.
I know it is. Now I know, no, I know it is, right? But think about how that is analogous to the world we live in right now,
Yeah.
right? That it is David, when I surf the internet or I turn on Waze, that I'm spending my time, which has value, to create value for someone else, who's not sharing that value with me, right? It's just like, it's the same thing in my mind, right? I'm an investor. I put an order on the market that generates revenues, but I am creating that value and it's not being shared with me. That was the fundamental point of that guy, right? Fast forward 30 years, it's the same analogy. I'm devoting my time, which has value, to create value for other people who are not sharing with me. So that actually, oddly enough, was the spark that caused Manetu to happen, right? Because you take all these emerging technologies and you start thinking about data and who creates the value around data. The world is changing, right? And you layer on top of that the ideas of regulation that is addressing the behaviors that the regulators and the public are starting to become concerned with, right? Like data protection, right? Ensuring that whatever data is collected from the customers is being protected in the highest possible way, right? There was no obligations about that, 10 years ago, right? Disclosures around data breaches, right? David, your data has been stolen from company X. Company X doesn't even have to tell you that it's happened, right? So that is changing, right? So again, the analogies with the existing regulatory structures, right, you see it. It's the same pattern, right? It's awful that there was a data breach and my data was stolen by criminals and that company didn't even tell me. I had no idea. Now they have to tell you.
And it's not just reserved for the historically regulated financial services and healthcare industries, which should be regulated the most, but it's also trickling down to consumer level because we all know that that data is incredibly valuable, even if it's not for a 401k or my medical history.
That's right. That's right. It's so what is fascinating to me, and again, this goes back to Manitou, is that at the highest levels, right, we were always thinking, let's collect as much data as we can get because creating the metadata has a lot of value to us. We can see the behavior of the herd. And if you can see the behavior of the herd, you can predict the behavior of the herd and you can offer them better services and be more responsive. Now I feel like the pendulum is swinging another direction where it's the behavior of the individual, right? And the individual now has a lot of value, right? And so now the data privacy laws are starting to address data on an individual level. So GDPR was first, California's fallen second, and really fundamentally, as it relates to data subjects, people like you and me, it's two categories that I feel matter, right? It's transparency and control, right? And the regulators have a lot of different rules around it, but fundamentally, a company needs and should, I believe, in fact, be able to articulate to a data subject or a consumer, whoever the data subject is, the data that they hold on them at a personal level, right? It is what company can you imagine kind of taking the position, I don't want to be transparent about your personal data, right? If you take it in the negative, right? And oddly, a lot of companies do that, right? So like under the California Consumer Protection Act, which has the requirement of transparency, right? A lot of companies ask you if you're a California resident. And if you say no, they largely give you the finger, right? That is not good. That is not good customer service, right? Because why are you hiding my data? I just want to know what you've got. Why aren't you telling me what you've got? Right? Bad customer service, right?
Right.
So I actually think it's probably less nefarious than that, frankly, right? Because most companies, If they click yes, it's a lot of work to respond to those access requests. And that's what Manetu is designed to make easy, right? So hopefully as we grow as a company and more people start using Manetu, right, they'll see that it's an enlightened way of providing access to people, right? And it's easy, right? It's not a hard thing to do, right? It's not like today the way it works is if somebody makes a request for data, the poor person who gets that request has to run around the organization and figure out where is that data stored, and I need to make a request to get the data out, right? Then I got to compile it. I want to review it because I can't just freaking give data out without taking a look at it. And then I need to figure out a secure way to get it to the person. And if the person wants to make changes or delete it, the whole thing goes back in reverse. And, it's expensive and hard, right? So as companies like ours take root, which really automates the entire thing. It's not just automating workflow, but just completely makes it non-manual. Then companies will be like, there, it doesn't matter to me if the guy's in California or if the guy's in New Jersey, right? It doesn't cost me anything to give this guy transparency. I'm going to give him transparency, right? And if a company's not giving you transparency, the question is, well, why are you not giving me transparency, right?
Early on about some of the big players in the space, but and how their solutions are more about automating the processing after the request comes in. But Manitou differentiates itself because it basically puts it right with the consumer with the request and takes it from there and doesn't require that one step, two step, three step. It just integrates it all in.
That's right. Yeah, like we're easy, right? So again, we're enterprise people, so we appreciate the problems of regulation, right? Regulation is expensive, has a negative effect on your business, and it's hard to implement, right? Which have all sorts of costs. So what we tried to do was say, look, first of all, we'll make it cost effective relative to the problem that's being solved. Secondly, and this is how it frankly works, is we just simply connect it to a database. And you, the company, log into that database. Manetu does never touches the data, never gets access to your database. You log into it, and we discover the personally identifiable information that's there. We put it into our platform, and then once it's in the platform, the consumer or the data subject can then validate themselves electronically that they are who they say they are, which takes out an important step. And once validated, they see in one place immediately the data that resides across the entire organization that's connected to us. Right? And there is no need for the back and forth, right? It's just transparency. And what I find ironic is that the data privacy laws allow companies up to 45 days, and you can get extensions, to be compliant with these requests. The reason that it takes so long is because it's so hard, right? So once we make it easy, right, consumers will be able to get access to their data when they want access. And most of these laws prohibit people from making data subject access requests more than twice a year. So literally, these are snapshots in a moment in time. Whereas if you're using an automated platform, if I wake up on Monday and I'm like, oh, I wonder what data this company has on me, or hey, I've moved this week and I want to update my data, I can literally just log in and do it. And it's no cost to the company to let me do that, right? So you almost want to encourage your consumer, right, your customers to actually use the platform because there's a lot of benefits in using the platform. And again, it's fully automated, right? So there's nobody has to do any work. I mean, I love it, needless to say.
So, Dave, how do you see Manitou evolving their product? Certainly a lot of possibilities to take advantage of that direct line of communication between the consumer and the company regarding their data and the ability of the consumer to communicate preferences on the use of that data.
Well, I see eventually companies taking their more risky data sets and moving it into our platform because our platform really leverages all of the good emerging technologies to make the data super safe. And for another podcast, because I'm not the guy to talk about this, absolutely not. But our team are some of the best distributed ledger blockchain people in the world, right? So we actually have the founder of the Hyperledger blockchain on our team, right? Hyperledger has 12 maintainers. 4 of the 12 maintainers work for Manetu. So we have a deep, deep, deep understanding on the underpinnings of blockchain technology. Interestingly, our core platform does not use blockchain, but we leverage tons of the concepts to make the data secure and highly, 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 highly encrypted, right? So I can see as we develop our product that people that have very sensitive data will want to put it on our platform. Another piece of our platform is the way we encrypt the data is at a very low level, right? So every attribute can be associated with an identity. And what we call artifacts, which are documents and media, can also at a very granular level be associated with an identity. So I think in the future, people, and we're talking with people about this, when they want to share data among a trusted network, whatever that data is, personal data or otherwise, our platform is built in a way that really enables that. So, what we're really talking about are applications, right? So our first application of our platform is in the data privacy space, right? But because the platform is really what we lacked in our large enterprise world around security, around governance, around the ability to share data at a granular level, around a company's concern with unknown actors gaining access to the network. That's all stuff that we were struggling with in our prior lives. So we built a platform that frankly did all those things, right? And so when we talk with customers, what's been exciting for me is that there are some customers that are actually not even subject to the data privacy laws, but they're using our platform for other reasons than compliance with data privacy, right? So that to me kind of validates that the data privacy people may also want to start using our platform for things unrelated to data privacy.
So give me a compelling example.
Well, a compelling example is that, and again, I'll need to get the technology guys to this.
You can get high level. It's
But
okay.
yeah, but at a high level, fundamentally what happens is when a data subject opens up a digital wallet, and that digital wallet, gives him transparent or her transparent access to their data, the more users, the more enterprise customers we have that end at that endpoint, you're creating a very, very strong digital identity with that endpoint, right? And so you start to know, this guy who's, coming in from his cell phone, right, or logging in from his desktop has, a verified relationship on our network with 15 separate service providers. I'm really sure that that guy is who he says he is. So we start to create a super strong digital identity. Then you start thinking about, okay, how can I leverage that super strong digital identity, right? So let's say hypothetically, a bank is using Manetu, and the customer has already gone through KYC AML, right? And that heavy lift has been done by our bank customer. Another bank customer that our consumer wants to have a relationship with should be able to rely on the work that was done at the first bank, because we know that this endpoint is who they say they are. So that's like a little bastardization, frankly, of a blockchain use case, right? Because there were a lot of blockchain use cases out there where people were trying to build consortiums where they could kind of validate the identity of a shared container that represented a person. But rather than us doing a consortium, right, we're solving a data privacy problem that gets you to the same place, but for a different reason. And it's not a consortium. So it's not a closed group of people. It can be leveraged by anybody who really cares about that digital identity. So we're working with a market that's not interested so much in complying with the data privacy laws because they don't have a European presence and they're not doing business in California. So they actually, right now, data privacy is not an issue for them, but they have a strong need to understand who their members are, and they're using us as an identity management platform, which is freaking cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I remember one of my clients was very excited about trying to monetize it for the consumer, where the consumer can say, hey, I have all this data and I'm willing to sell it to companies. That seems unlikely to get off the ground to me because I think that the data that's truly valuable are the people who wouldn't care about the incremental value that they would get for their data. And the only people who would care about it would be the ones that don't have a lot of money who wouldn't be interesting from a marketing perspective. But is that too simplistic of a way to view that kind of environment?
I think so. What I learned fiddling around with emerging technologies is that emerging technologies themselves, for the most part, are not innovative, right? Like it really what causes the explosion is how somebody creates a business model that sits on top of that technology, right? So to me, like an analogy would be the internet. Like the internet itself was this cool thing, right? But the internet became really valuable when people figured out how to run business models on it, right? The underlying technology was a communication network, right? But when people realized they could really leverage the internet to have innovative business models, that's when it exploded. Blockchain is the same way, right? Blockchain is a cool technology, but the reality of blockchain is that blockchain's pre-existing technologies mashed together to do something, right? And the application of Bitcoin, right, was the application that had value, which was an innovative business model, right? Not the underlying technology, right? Now, maybe mashing the technologies together was an innovative idea. It was, right? But the reality is distributed computing has been around forever. Cryptography has been around forever, right? So a lot of the core concepts of blockchain were there, right? What caused blockchain to pop into the world's consciousness is that somebody said, yeah, I have these different technologies. I'm going to mash them together. And I actually have a use case that makes sense. Digital currency, right? Bang. That was innovation, right? And so taking it back to like Manitou and your question, right? We're laying the infrastructure, right? What we're not is we don't want to become the man, right? We don't ever have access to the data. So what we want to do is say, look, we're going to give you a safe place to play, right? Where your data is super secure. You are providing transparency to the people who care about their personal data, the endpoint. So what Manitou, I hope happens is that people look at the infrastructure that we're building and they start to leverage that in ways that Manitou is not best suited to figure out, right? And to go to your example, right? Do I think that consumers in near term are going to be able to say, look, I'm locking down all my personal information and you're going to have to come to me to use it? I don't think so, right? But do I think that somebody could come along and say, I make $5 on an anonymized profile, right? Because I don't have the permission to actually share the details, right? But I know if I share the details, I'm going to get paid $500. So why shouldn't I go to this person who I know, he's my customer, and say to that person, hey, look, I'm doing a research project, right? This is how I'm using your data, right? Would you consent to me actually sharing more of your data than I currently am able to do? And I will pay you, right? Because I'm now getting paid $500. I will pay you 250 of the $500 to participate for a short period of time. And Manitu's platform allows you to set a time limit. So when that time ends, they cannot decrypt that data. The key goes away, right? And so you're starting to create an environment potentially where the data subject, right, starts to participate in value creation, right? And that then brings me full circle to the thing that's always been bugging me about the world is that, we are creating value that is being leveraged by other people and not participating in it. Just like in the financial markets, right? Data markets are exactly the same thing, right? No one's getting enough when it's anonymous, right? So again, going back to the trading market example, right? If the world knew that it was my order and I am dumb flow, there's no value there, right? But if you knew that order belonged to a person who actually has a track record of picking good stocks, you'd pay a lot to know that, right? And if I'm fine with that as the order entry, right? Where I get a revenue stream, I put my order down as price time priority, and 50 people afterwards learn it's me, and they're like, holy shit, I'm going to follow that guy's behavior and I'm going to get paid for it. Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, that copy trading is becoming very popular in the crypto space and everywhere. I was looking at some the other day that do the trade copy servers, and the traders get ranked and you can trade alongside of it.
Oh, that. Excellent. Right. But that's the point. I did not know that that was happening.
It's sort of like a DI, do it yourself fund manager. You just sort of trade along. In fact, I forget the name of the outfit that has this whole commercial about one guy who does nothing all day and the other guy follows the stock market and makes tons of money for the guy who does nothing all day. It's,
Yeah. Well,
everybody likes the idea of doing nothing and getting paid tons of money while somebody else works really hard.
Yeah. Oh, look, after you and I'd probably make a fortune because all you need to do is trade the opposite of my position.
Yeah, you and me both. Your point about the data subjects giving permission and allowing the use of the company to access their data could certainly be used in like an AML context where you're trying to facilitate compliance. I know that's a big issue in the DeFi space because it's not really well suited to that. But your product could certainly integrate into an existing model like that, no?
Your point's a good one because some of the customers that we get a lot of traction with are actually customers that are engaged in a digitalization strategy, right? So they're re-looking at their physical world, which is still super manual. And as they go to a digital world, right, they're starting to layer on things like privacy, right? Because that has to be part of the new digital world, right? So it's funny, we get a lot of traction with people who are engaged in digitalization projects.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that that's just going to continue. Dave, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. It's really been enlightening and great to talk to you as usual. And I wish you the best of luck with Manetu, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
You and my wife both. It was really great. I actually, again, I forget that I'm being recorded. So well done. Well done.